You are underwater in a glass box that is not really a world, but a controlled illusion of one, temperature stabilized, chemistry balanced, oxygen forced into existence by a machine you never see, and you exist inside it without ever needing to understand it, because understanding was never required for survival here. You are a fish, and your life has been reduced to a set of repeating patterns that feel like nature but are actually maintenance. Food appears at intervals that were decided for you. Light changes on a schedule that was set by someone else. The water stays within invisible chemical limits that you never approach because something outside the glass is always correcting, always compensating, always keeping the environment inside the range that keeps you alive. And you have no relationship with any of that machinery. You only have a relationship with the results it produces, which is to say, you have a relationship with stability, with the reliable texture of a world that does not surprise you. Your human is part of that system, not physically present most of the time, not swimming alongside you, not a constant presence in your experience of the water, but structurally essential in the way that a foundation is essential, invisible when functioning, catastrophic when gone. And then one day that foundation disappears, not dramatically, not violently, just silently. The human is gone along with every other human on Earth, and the system does not know this. Machines do not register absence the way living things do. Filters still run. Lights still cycle through their programmed sequence. Pumps still push water through tubes in the same artificial circulation pattern they have always used. And for you, nothing changes at first. You swim the way you always swim. You move through currents that feel familiar. You wait for food at the interval when food usually arrives, and the first failure is subtle enough that it does not register as failure. Food stops appearing with its usual consistency, not completely, not all at once, just with a slight irregularity that sits at the edge of what you notice, and because your life has never required planning beyond the immediate moment, because the future has always been something the system handled on your behalf. You do not interpret this as the beginning of collapse. You interpret it as a minor variation in a system that has always corrected itself. The tank is still stable, the water is still clear, oxygen still moves through it, and so you continue. But biological systems are not designed for patience. They are designed for cycles that assume inputs will keep arriving. And when inputs stop arriving, the cycle does not pause and wait. It continues running and begins to consume itself. Day 2. The water begins to change in ways that do not exist for you as information, but exist for you as sensation. Waste accumulates slightly faster than the filtration processes it. Oxygen levels shift in ways that are small but not nothing, and your body responds before anything in your awareness does. You find yourself moving closer to the surface more often, not because you have decided to, but because your physiology is tracking something beneath the level of decision. The pump still runs, but at reducing efficiency, particles that would have been cycled through and removed are settling instead. Food remnants that were never cleaned begin to break down in the water column, and what was a closed loop maintained from outside is becoming an incomplete loop maintained by nothing. Day 3. The filtration weakens further through compounding failure, one small inefficiency multiplying into another. Bacteria populations inside the tank begin to shift because the chemical environment they depend on is shifting. Invisible ecosystems that were always present but always controlled start reorganizing according to their own logic rather than the logic of the machine. And you begin to feel this in the way that fish feel things, not as understanding but as movement, as the frequency of your changes in direction, as how close to the surface you stay, as a persistent low-level agitation that has no object you can identify because you do not identify objects. You only respond to conditions, and conditions are deteriorating in ways that are real but not yet critical. Day 4, oxygen distribution becomes uneven across the tank. Currents weaken, and for the first time in your existence, you experience the glass not as the shape of the world, but as a boundary, a limitation, something that defines what you cannot do rather than what you can. There is nowhere else to go. No gradient you can follow out of the discomfort, only persistence inside a space that is slowly becoming less livable. And persistence is not always enough, but it is all you have. Day 5, the filtration stops compensating and the water becomes something it was never designed to be. Biologically active in its own direction, algae begins to grow in the areas where light still reaches, no longer regulated by cleaning cycles and chemical balance, just growing because the conditions allow it and nothing prevents it. The tank is no longer a simulation of a natural environment. It is something stranger than that. a sealed ecosystem that has lost its external management and is now reorganizing according to internal pressure. And you are inside it, and the reorganization is happening around you and through you and in response to you. Weeks pass, and what was crisis becomes baseline. The water is not what it was, but it is what it is, and what it is has become the condition you navigate. Some fish do not survive this phase, and the ones that do not survive are not random. They are specific, the ones most shaped by human preference rather than functional necessity. The ones bred for trailing fins that slow movement, for compressed body shapes that reduce respiratory efficiency, for coloration that makes camouflage impossible. These fail first, and they fail completely. And their failure is the first act of a selection process that has no designer, no intention, no goal, only the simple arithmetic of which traits allow continued existence in conditions that are no longer artificially corrected. The survivors are not the most beautiful by any standard that was applied to them before. They are the most functional by the only standard that now applies, which is survival in degrading water, inconsistent oxygen, unreliable food, and the particular biological chaos of an ecosystem finding its own equilibrium, and behavior begins to shift, not through learning in any conscious sense, but through the differential survival of individuals whose behavior patterns happen to fit the new conditions better than the behavior patterns of those who did not survive. Feeding strategies diversify, movement patterns change, interactions between species inside the tank change because the power dynamics of the artificial environment have dissolved and something rawer has replaced them. Months become years. The glass enclosure begins to fail structurally in the slow way that materials fail when maintenance stops. Microfractures develop in the seals. External moisture interacts with internal chemistry. Temperature differentials that the equipment once absorbed now reach the glass directly and stress it. And eventually the boundary between inside and outside begins to dissolve. Not in one moment, but through accumulating porosity. Water that is not filtered, not controlled, not maintained begins to interact with water that was all of those things, and the introduction of external variability accelerates every process that was already underway. Temperature fluctuates with the seasons for the first time. Mineral content shifts. Microorganisms arrive that were never part of the original system, and the tank is no longer a closed environment. It is an open one, connected to the larger world by the same failure that ended the human system. And for the fish that survived this transition, the world has become genuinely larger, not as a gift, not as freedom in any sense that implies comfort, but as a set of new pressures that require new responses. Movement ranges expand because survival now requires following gradients of oxygen and temperature and nutrient availability that shift across a space larger than the glass ever contained. Feeding strategies continue to diversify because what is available is no longer consistent or predictable, and the generations that are born into this environment are born into pressure rather than stability. And pressure is a more honest teacher than stability ever was, because pressure does not maintain, it only selects, and selection is slow, but it is absolute. Generations pass, and body forms begin to drift away from the shapes that human preference created. Fins become more functional and less ornamental because fins that slow movement are fins that get you eaten or that keep you from eating. Coloration shifts toward camouflage because visibility in an environment with predators is a liability rather than an aesthetic achievement. Metabolic efficiency becomes the trait that determines reproduction because food is now something you find rather than something that appears. And the population that remains is not the population that was purchased and placed and maintained. It is a population that was forged out of what that population contained. The latent functional capacity that domestic life never needed to activate, the glass structure eventually fails completely. Not in a single dramatic collapse, but through the quiet accumulation of structural defeat. And when the last boundary between the tank and the surrounding environment dissolves, there is no longer a distinction between inside and outside. The water merges with whatever water system surrounds it. A river, a flooded basement. A chain of connected pools, and the fish that survive are now part of a larger ecological network than any of them have ever navigated. Predators that never existed in the original tank begin interacting with them. Competitors arrive from lineages that were never ornamental. Environmental variability operates on scales that the glass never transmitted, and evolution accelerates because survival is no longer buffered by containment. It is direct and immediate and without appeal. Thousands of years later, descendants of those ornamental fish are not recognizable as what they were. They are not defined by the preferences of the people who bred them. They are defined entirely by what the environment required and what they were able to provide, some lineages become fast and social, moving in coordinated groups through river systems that change with seasons, their bodies streamlined by generations of selection for efficient travel through moving water. Others become slow and hidden, camouflaged against substrate in still environments. Ambush specialists whose patience is not a behavior they learned, but a shape they became. Some develop enhanced sensitivity to pressure and vibration, because in murky water where vision fails, sensing the movement of other bodies through the water column is more useful than any amount of color. And in deep sediment-rich zones where light barely reaches, body forms emerge that would be unrecognizable to anyone who once kept fish in a glass box, elongated, pale, navigating by senses that were always present but never needed until now. Millions of years pass, and the descendants of what once swam in a controlled chemical solution now occupy multiple ecological niches across freshwater systems that have outlasted every structure humans ever built. They are prey and predator. They are integrated into food webs that have no memory of the word ornamental, and somewhere in the deep structure of how they move, there are still faint traces. Not memories, nothing like awareness, but tendencies in movement that were shaped by confined space and never fully erased. Patterns that once optimized for navigating a glass rectangle now repurposed for navigating complex aquatic terrain. And those traces remain only because evolution does not clean house completely. It repurposes what still functions and discards only what actively costs, and what once allowed survival inside a sealed and maintained world becomes, across enough time, the foundation for survival in an open and indifferent one. And the water moves around them the way it has always moved, without caring what swims through it, without remembering what it once contained.